Good evening. My name is Ellen Comisar. Thank you for waiting. If you showed up at 7, we had a couple technical glitches, but Friday Frontliner is now live, and we are here with Joyce Maynard, a fan favorite. So Joyce has a new book out this past Tuesday, How the Light Gets In, which is kind of a sequel, maybe a standalone. We'll talk about that, to Count the Ways, which introduced us to a great family. So let me just give you my A Mighty Blaze information pitch and a little information, and then we'll get right into the discussion with Joyce. So A Mighty Blaze started at the beginning of COVID when authors could not go on tour, and Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt said, we have to solve this. So they created A Mighty Blaze as a way to connect readers and to authors and vice versa. We have a lot of shows. We are going strong now 4 years after launch, and we have no intention of stopping. It's a team of creatives who are volunteering their time full-time. And so what we would like is nothing better than for you to go out and buy books at indie booksellers, at libro.fm, at bookshop.org. We'll have some links to those as the show goes on. If you like what you see here, go to our website, amightyblaze.com, sign up for our newsletter, and then you'll get a weekly update about all the shows that are coming. We're also all over social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, YouTube, where you can subscribe to our channel and view all of the old shows whenever you want. So let's get started. Joyce, welcome, welcome.
Always fun to have a conversation with the Mighty Blaze, Ellen.
Well, thank you for joining us again. So as everyone knows, Joyce has lots of books out, and she is one of those authors who still gets tons of praise from other brand name authors. For example, Jodi Picoult raves that Joyce has stitched together a warm, rich patchwork quilt of a novel that reminds us that history is made up simply of our stories. And Adrienne Brodeur describes this book as big-hearted and beautifully crafted, yet another time, a propulsively readable and full of flawed and fickle characters book. And Wally Lamb says he loved this book because it exemplifies a master storyteller at the top of her game. And I couldn't agree more.
And I made Richard Russo cry. I like that.
Oh, well, that's impressive.
Yeah. 3 times, he said.
Oh, we'll have to find out when, or without giving away any plot lines. So most of you know Joyce is the author of 12 earlier novels, 5 books of nonfiction, and was a syndicated columnist with a column called Domestic Affairs. Her best-selling memoir, At Home in the World, is now available in 16 languages. 2 of her novels, To Die For and Labor Day, have been made into movies. And when Joyce is not visiting us at the Blaze, she can be found in California, New Hampshire, or Guatemala, where she has homes and leads workshops. So welcome, welcome.
Let's get started talking. You know, Ellen, I always say, and I always mean it, when a book comes out, I get a little wired up because, as you know, as a writer, it's a very lonely thing. Writing a book, and I spend a lot of my time by myself in a room, not entirely by myself because I'm with my characters, but I'm actually a pretty sociable person. So the moments when a book comes out, and of course they're rare and they're special, are the moments when I get to hear back and be out in the world, or out in the virtual world anyway. So I'm really hoping, among other things, I'm looking forward to our conversation, and I'm really hoping that whoever is out there listening, chime in and let me know your questions and the things that are on your mind. And you probably haven't read How the Light Gets In yet because it just came out a few days ago, and it's not a short book. Although people are starting to say they have read it and that they've stayed up all night doing that.
Yes.
But ask me questions about other things too, and I would love to hear what's on your mind.
So for readers who aren't familiar with this book, which is totally wonderful and has a beautiful cover,
which I'm also wearing on my t-shirt.
Oh, check that out.
This is the first time I've had merch.
Joyce merch. Wow. And
There's
can we
actually,
buy that?
I'm going to make t-shirts available. It's a very limited edition t-shirt that features the cover of the book, which I'll tell you more about where that cover came from.
Please.
that's actually my own bed in my house in New Hampshire, painted by a
Ooh.
very old friend who is an artist. My bed doesn't look as sort of sad as that bed, but that's my bed. Anyway, when people host book clubs, they get a T-shirt. So we'll
Oh.
talk about that at some point, maybe.
Well, that's a good incentive, an even better incentive. So for those of our viewers who have yet to read this book and may not have even read Count the Ways, which is features the same bunch of characters, or at least many of the same characters, can you just give us a brief synopsis of this
Absolutely.
one without who we're meeting and
No
why we
spoilers.
want to
No
meet them
spoilers.
again?
I'm careful about that. So I've been following the story of a family, a very American family, over the course of more than 50 years in the two books. And the first one, Count the Ways, begins. The central character is the mother, Eleanor. She's not a mother yet when we meet her. She's a young girl, and we meet her in the 60s and early 70s, and follow her through young, passionate love affair, marriage, the births of her 3 children, the slow unraveling of her marriage, and the painful divorce that follows. And after. She's exactly the same age that I am, which means she was young in the 70s. She was born in 1953. She was young in the 70s, 80s, having babies, raising children. And when the first book ended, Count the Ways, I had taken her up to the age of 55 and the year 2009. And I had no intention of continuing the story. But readers were really upset that they didn't know what was going to come next. And
my book clubs, I facilitated 2 book clubs with this book. And at the end of both, we had speculation. After the first one, we didn't know this was going to be How the Light Gets In was coming. We were all speculating. What do you think happens to Eleanor? What do you think happens?
Well, it was really readers who told me that it was unacceptable to leave. And some of them, I will admit, and you might have seen this in your book clubs, some women were very angry, which is not a bad thing in my mind. I want to inspire strong emotion through my books. And that means I want you to cry. I want you to laugh. I want you to be scared, maybe, and worried, anxious, and come out the other end of those things. But some women were really upset, very specifically, that Eleanor seemed never to meet her own needs. She was always taking care of everybody else. And more than one woman wrote and said, I just threw this book down on the floor. I was so mad, and picked it up again later. They had to keep on reading. But, and of course, that's not a good idea. But if our characters in our books only made wise choices, our books would be very short and rather boring. Mm-hmm. So, she does something that many women do, and I'll just speak for myself, something that I did, which was to turn herself over to the service of her family, not only to the detriment of herself, but sometimes, her family isn't thrilled that she's done this either. And there's a lot of trouble with her children that comes out of her being too self-sacrificing. So readers said, we want her to have a good time. And in the second book, picks up in the year 2010, brings her right up to 2024. She's 70 at the end of it. You don't have to have read the first book, although I think it's a good idea, and you're going to want to after you've read this one. But and of course, she still has more problems, or there wouldn't be an interesting story to tell. But this is the story of a woman who finally says, "It's my turn now," and gets to look around. The children are gone, the husband is gone, and ask, who am I, and what do I need? That's a lot of women's story at this age. It's mine.
One of the things that struck me is I have read both books, but as I was reading this, I was struck by how much this was potentially a standalone. Somebody could get to this book,
that was,
and they do get the backstory, and whether that was a challenge to decide whether you wanted it as a standalone versus a true sequel. Well,
it is a true sequel. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think a good a good sequel should also not require the reader to have read. I mean, there's a very good example right now with Colm
Mhm.
Tobin's book, Long Island, that's just out, and you don't have to have read Brooklyn. So yeah, I totally recommend you dive right in with this one, and then when you're finished and you're so mad that it's all over and you miss those characters, guess what? I've got another novel for you. So that's totally fine.
And like this book, Count the Ways does a wonderful job of plugging in the music, the touchstones of our lives, the incidents that are happening socially, and historically, and linking them. And I noticed, in this book there was a lot of John Prine. Do Eleanor's music tastes change over time? Are you
Well,
still,
it's
or
more
did
that
yours, and that affected?
it's not that it's a book about people's musical tastes, of
No,
course, but I I don't know how you set a book in contemporary America and not show what's going on outside of your house. And part of what's going on outside of the house is our friends and our jobs and our schools and our love affairs and our hate affairs, and part is the world. So of course, this book is set in part during the Trump years, and I have no desire to inject my politics into my fiction. I don't. That's not what I have strong views, but that's not what you buy my books for. But my characters have strong views, and they're affected by things. So there is, for instance, no spoiler here, a scene in the book where Eleanor decides to throw a party for all of her friends to celebrate the what she imagines is going to be the election of the first woman president, and she bakes a chocolate cake for this event. And we all know, this isn't a spoiler, we know the night didn't turn out the way we thought, whatever you think about that. But what Eleanor thought was she no longer had an appetite for chocolate cake. So throughout, I wanted you to experience my characters against the backdrop of American life, and that with all of its facets. And some of them, it's not sort of, just like the big bullet point events, but as you mentioned, John Prine, she happens to be a John Prine fan. I happen to be one too. His death is an event in her life that
of COVID.
in which the big national things going on intersect with our lives, and it's not a major plot point, but
Yeah.
those things happen in Count the Ways. She sends her daughter Ursula off to school when Ursula's seven, to watch with her whole class and with all the children of America the launching of the Challenger, and we all know what happened that day. It's big events experienced by regular people.
Right. I mean, I thought it was, all of them get woven in really well, and you do have characters who are, taken in by the political tenor of the time, and you have people who are reacting to them, and so there's something very almost comforting to read about people who sound like somebody you might have been, or somebody
Mhm.
and so there's a familiarity, which I really liked about
You
it. I
know,
found.
one of the things that sorry, I didn't mean to
Go ahead.
interrupt you.
Go ahead.
One of the things that was particularly interesting and challenging to me was that I do have a character, as you just mentioned, who he's actually the husband of one of Eleanor's children, Jake, and
Mhm.
he loves his wife. He adores his wife. He loves his children. He loses his job and he gets very angry and bitter and caught up in the conspiracy theories that were going around at that period, and probably still always now. And he makes the choice. He joins a militia group and he drives to the Capitol on January 6th of 2021. He's one of those people, and he's not a villain. And I wanted that was important to me, to get inside the head of somebody that I would have said, oh, I have no sympathy for him, but it's my job to have sympathy for every character and to see if I can figure out what led them to do what they did. It doesn't mean that I endorse it, but I want to understand them. And I actually really like Jake. I feel for Jake. He's a kind of
There's,
tragic figure, but so yeah, that I'm an equal opportunity character builder, and my characters come from many different points of view. We have in the book, one of the things that Eleanor deals with in the new book is an extraordinarily painful estrangement from an adult child, her daughter Ursula, actually, with whom she had been so close. Um, I know that this is a silent epidemic in our culture right now, and I would be very surprised if there weren't women and possibly men listening to this right now who had had this experience but felt very shameful and isolated. You know, what is more damning than to have a beloved child cut you out of their life? I wanted to, not as a sort of me getting on a soapbox about a theme, a topic,
no.
you know, a sociological phenomenon, but it's part of life. It's part of life today, and I'm very much I'm a very, I've used this word several times already in our conversation, American writer. It's interesting because my
Mhm.
books are very popular in France, but
Interesting.
I think part of what the French love about them is that they're very interested in America.
Right. I think it's this idea that all of your characters, regardless of their behavior, there's some sympathetic tone. There's some, these aren't unidimensional characters. You can, even with Ursula, the daughter who's estranged, you sort of get why she is and you
Yep.
understand how
I
she
wanted to
gets
get into
there.
that. Absolutely.
Yes.
Um,
So,
and I don't think, incidentally, the character of Cam, who we meet more in the, we see a little bit of him mostly in flashbacks in the new novel, How the Light Gets In. But some people said, "Oh, I just hated that husband that Eleanor had." I don't hate him. I see why she loved him, and he had some very endearing qualities, and some that made for a lot of difficulty.
yes.
Um,
So I looked back at a number of old interviews with you, and in 2016, you were
oh,
interviewed by Lit Hub, and you said that you want to stretch yourself as a writer. So I'm wondering, how did this book stretch you as a writer?
well, I'm always doing that. I don't think that's something you sort of do once and then you've done it. I hope that every book, frankly, I hope that every book is deeper and stronger than the ones before. And I, I don't like to say I have a favorite book any more than I'd have a favorite child, but I do think this is my best book, and that's a big thing for me to say after I've been publishing my work for 51 years now. And it's because I know more now. You know, if you're a basketball player, you don't get better by the age of 70. And if you're a ballerina, you've hung up your shoes long ago. But one of the great things about being a writer is you can continue to do your work. So there's a lot in this book that I couldn't have written because I didn't know it. And it has less to do with my skill as a writer. I think I know I've been knowing how to write for quite some time than it does with my understanding of human behavior and relationships. And maybe it has to do with um, a kind of humility that we acquire when we're older. Um, if I were to name one theme, and I don't really want to name one theme of these, the pair of these books, it would be forgiveness.
Mhm.
And forgiveness is hard come by, and it usually takes a long time to get to that place. Eleanor, one of the reasons why Eleanor's marriage broke down is her husband was responsible for a terrible accident that befell their youngest child when he was 5 years old, and whose reverberations continue throughout the story. And she can't forgive him. She is very bitter and she can't forgive him. But ultimately, she does. And um, I, I I wrote a book that explored themes: family, marriage, love, loss, relationship, divorce, that I'd certainly tackled before in other books of mine, but I'd never been me as I am now tackling them. So I do think I have the most to say in this one,
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it was also very ambitious just in terms of the numbers of characters and years that I was kind of keeping track of. I will
Yes.
say in a completely different way, my novel, The Bird Hotel, really stretched me. And it's the novel that I published in between Count the Ways and
Right.
How the Light Gets In. I published a book that had nothing to do with Eleanor and her family and a New Hampshire farm and everything we've been discussing. And it's a kind of magical realist novel set in an imaginary Central American country, with as its central character a woman who has an American woman, North American, I always say. Central America is America too, has experienced a terrible, devastating loss. I won't say what, and doesn't really care if she lives or dies, but gets on a bus and ends up in this little Mayan indigenous village, which bears quite a strong resemblance to the Mayan indigenous village where I live part-time and where I host my writing workshops. And She starts a hotel there, or she runs a hotel there. And it was it was a completely different kind of story. I wrote it sort of under the radar during the pandemic, really almost as a fun bedtime story for the two young women who were living with me at my house in Guatemala during the first 6 months of the pandemic. But it has become a kind of underground success. It's really caught on as a big book club book. And that one was definitely me stretching, me doing something totally different.
Mhm. Um, in another interview, you talked about yourself being an unfashionable writer. So my question is both, have you grown out of that? I
Well,
think you
look how
have.
fashionable I am now, for goodness sake.
Totally.
I'm wearing
Whew.
my How the Light Gets In shirt. No, but of course I know what you mean. What I'm not is, there are all these sort of MFA terms of, postmodern or I don't even know what. I'm a storyteller. And
Mhm.
I don't think good storytelling goes in or out of fashion. But I'm not I'm not doing stream of consciousness. I'm not doing braided memoir, or there's a lot of terms and phrases that one hears in a lot of writing workshops. Um, I believe in telling a good story and creating characters that you care about. You might love them, you might hate them, but they feel like real people. And so that's, I guess, what I meant, that I'm sort of I'm a traditionalist in some ways. I want It's also really important that I write books that that you can understand, that you can read, that I don't mean that they're simple,
No.
but I don't want to confuse you. I I think it may come. There may be this too. I have always had to write for my living. I've been a journeyman. I was a single parent supporting 3 children. I didn't ever have writer's block because I didn't have the luxury of that. I had to always be writing. I was very disciplined about that. I also knew that if people didn't read my work, um, there wouldn't be food on the table. There wouldn't be a roof over our heads. And so that kind of very, arty, 5 pages about, the cereal in somebody's bowl. I couldn't afford to do that. I might have gotten some great literary prize for that, but I don't think people were going to buy the book. So, I don't mean to say that I've ever sold out or felt that I was, being some kind of a hack. I take my writing, that
Mhm.
craft of writing, really seriously. But I also take giving you a good story seriously.
Mhm. Are there writers today that you think of as being highly fashionable? And
Oh, I'm not going to say anything negative about anyone. I'm not going to do that. I will just say, I love a good story. And some of them are writers from long ago, Edith Wharton or Henry James, but contemporary writers. Um, I'm marking the death of a writer that I love very much, Alice Munro, by setting myself to the challenge of reading every one of her short stories this
wow.
summer while I'm on the road. And she was a master of character and authentic, not show-offy writing at all, just true writing, just a
Mhm.
true observer of human behavior. That's
Mhm.
that's my idea.
That's great. So I do see, like, in the characters when you wrote about, especially some of the new characters, Rain and Spider, and
Oh, I love Rain. I mean, you can hate Rain,
you
but
hate Rain and love her, but you still love her. You're
I
like, you
do.
worry
I do.
about her. You're like, oh,
Young
what's she
single
gonna
mom who's a
do?
total screw up, but she's still saving up to get her son braces, and
Right.
she's putting Coca-Cola in the baby bottle, and winding up a swing-o-matic so he can just keep going and going and going forever. But she's trying her best, and she does some pretty questionable things.
Yes.
Her big dream is to get a really great vacuum cleaner and a chocolate fountain, so she can. There are two things she wants to do. She wants to do event catering of strawberries and chocolate fountain, and she wants to clean up crime scenes. She's really good at cleaning.
Yes.
But she's a new character in the new book. Coco, those who read Count the Ways will remember that Eleanor's husband Cam leaves her for their babysitter, Coco, who was skinny, adorable, cartwheeling 18-year-old. And we meet Coco now in the second book in a very different place in
Yes.
her life.
She was really interesting.
And she breaks my heart too.
Yeah.
She does an awful thing in this book. You just want to slap her face. But you keep reading too.
Mm-hmm. I was really curious about Guy McDowell.
Okay. Named after, that was my little homage to McDowell Writing Retreat.
I wondered about that.
Because I revised this book at McDowell. Guy, well, in the sequel, I wanted Eleanor to have a great love affair. And I also didn't want a man to be the answer to everything that was problematic in her life. So I gave a lot of thought. I spent a full year thinking about who would be right for Eleanor, as I would if it was like my sister or my friend, and I was trying to matchmake them, and I considered everything. I considered, I wonder if she'd like a woman, or I was very open-minded about the whole thing. I don't have to be open-minded to feel that, but I was open to all possibilities. And I came up with this guy who is named Guy, who's a climate change activist, and we don't need to say too much more about him, except that he has to go off to Antarctica periodically, which is a little problematic in their relationship.
The fact that his first name is Guy also struck me like he's sort of this almost a prototypical representative of the male species. He's that, and Toby's concerned, like, who is this guy?
Yeah,
he has, lowercase Guy.
Toby, her brain-injured son, just thinks he's kind of like a guy.
But as a character, he sort of is just that guy.
He is a guy.
We all know guys like Guy, and you love him and you hate him. And I think that's one of the things that your readers will identify with, whether or not they've had, later in life love affairs.
And incidentally, the later in life part was also really important to me. And it always is. I want to shine a light on the fact that women over 45 still have beating hearts and much more. And that I wanted to have a really great adult love affair, which doesn't mean married, move in together, happily ever after, all that other stuff. But I wanted that for her.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun to write it. It was fun. It was fun to come up with it, as it was very, in my novel Labor Day. I loved writing that love affair.
It's a great one. One of the things that I've noticed stylistically that you did in both Count the Ways and in this book is that at some point you turn to second person. And I don't know if that's something that you've done consciously or not, but
really, no, I didn't. I don't think I did turn to second person.
You sort of start talking. Here's an example. For 9 months, you carry a child in your body.
That's Eleanor's head. That's
right. So, but it's all that you get.
There's a chapter that's so important to me, and you just identified it. It's called The Definition of a Good Mother.
That's where I am.
And it is a question that haunts most mothers I know. What is a good mother? And everybody's trying to be a good mother, and it's just about impossible to be a good enough mother. So she is that's not really second person writing. That's more, she is speaking about the phenomenon of what one does. There is that true second person, which is a kind of I won't even say trendy. It's a new thing that people do, and it's interesting, and I've seen it work. Junot Diaz did it spectacularly well, and This Is How You Leave Her, I think it's called. This one was more, I stay with Eleanor, but Eleanor is thinking, this is what you do. You give birth to, she's in her head. If I were
to me, it sounded like almost like an omniscient narrator. You are, but I find it effective in that you is really me, and every other reader you have, every woman.
It is a little, it's actually, that passage is kind of the core of the book for me. And it's short. I love reading it out loud. I sometimes do that at readings. And maybe
that's interesting. I'm glad I landed on it.
You are very perceptive to land on that. This might be the moment to say that I always record my books on audio, and I won't let anybody else do them, with the exception of my younger son recorded Labor Day, because there had to be a male voice, and he's a fabulous professional actor. But I love to record, and I actually think it's one of the best ways to experience my books is with me reading them. And that particular passage is almost like the closest I have to a song that I could sing. Wow. Yeah. The definition of a good mother.
That's great.
I'm wondering if we have questions. I don't.
I think we will have a few coming up. I've seen that. So before we move to them, I just wanted to ask you. You mentioned you're reading Alice Munro. What else are you reading or rereading this summer?
That's enough. And I'm sort of, I wanted to totally immerse myself in one writer. And last summer, it was Andre Dubus II.
Oh.
The father of Andre III, who was a friend. And with whom I'll be doing an event in Boston, actually.
Oh, that's nice.
Wonderful writer. So right now it's just Alice Munro all the time. The truth is, I don't get to read a lot right now. I am going all across the country. I'm in a different town almost every day, but that's my goal.
And what are you writing, or are you writing? And what's next?
Do not write when I'm on tour. When I write, I do nothing but write. And when I can't do nothing but write, I write. I have a pretty great Facebook page, I will say, and I think I'll probably be pushing it over to Substack pretty soon. But so I can write short things for that. But I'm an all immersive writer. When I wrote How the Light Gets In, I holed up in my little cottage in New Hampshire in the month of November that had no central heat, and kept the wood stove going and didn't stop. And that's my style of writing. And doesn't mean that's the right one for anybody else. That's just me. Yeah.
Now, I know you wrote one book very quickly at MacDowell. Did this book, How the Light Gets In, take you longer than average, less than average?
I went back over it, but no, I tend to, I go in and then I don't come out until I've got a full draft. Labor Day was kind of a really surprising example of that. I wrote Labor Day in 12 sort of magical days at MacDowell, when I was just hearing the voice of this boy telling me this story. It sounds a little woo-woo, but that was really the case.
Well, I also read where you talked about wishing, going to bed, saying, asking your brain to please give you some story, give you some idea. And out came Eleanor.
Our brains work at night, and I don't want to miss out on anything. So ideas come to me in the night, and I want to harvest them in the morning.
All right. So we do have a few questions, I think, if we can get them up on the screen.
Amy, my friend Amy Persicchini from Kansas City, where I will be next week on July 2nd, says, do you know if your children read your books, and do they discuss them with you? Yes, I know that my children do not read my books.
Is that a good thing?
So, it used to hurt my feelings, and I think maybe someday they will, but I get it too. I think other people's children love my books, but it might be a little close to home. Not that, Count the Ways had some elements that might have made them uncomfortable of the marriage and the divorce, even though it was a work of fiction. This one really not, but I'm their mom. I'm not, Joyce Maynard writer. My daughter Audrey once said to me, "Could you just tell me the story of it?" And of course, it doesn't work that way, really. But so no, they haven't read my work. I think my son Willie actually has read some of my work, but not these two books. Someday, maybe someday.
It's interesting that because I mean, there's often been talk that many of your characters and life stories have sort of an intertwined, there are
They do. I
elements
mean,
that
if anybody who used to read my domestic affairs column, which I wrote for almost 10 years, and it followed the young years of my young family. I was married then and raising 3 young children at home in New Hampshire, and it was syndicated in a lot of papers, so it ran all over the country. And it is a kind of a portrait of a family long ago, but many of those stories are pretty timeless. And some of them come up in another form in Count the Ways and in How the Light Gets In. And many of the things that happen in those books never happened. I feel that I'm doing a good job if you don't know which are which, because it all feels real. So, yeah.
Well, I think your readers, your longtime readers, just have a sense that they know you, whether or not they've actually met you in person, that both between
They
the
do know
style.
me. You know, they're not wrong, I have to say, Ellen. I feel very known by my readers because I put a lot of me in my books, and I'm comfortable doing that for whatever odd reason. It's okay to do that. And you know, I sometimes I have friends. You know, I really do have friends in real life, but I also consider readers friends. The woman who just popped on, Amy Persicchini, I've been hearing from her for years, and actually one of the great things, and I know Amy, and I'll see Amy in Kansas City. One of the gifts of my writing life, and having written as long as I have, is that when I go across the country, I could actually, I wouldn't ever have to check into a hotel room. I have friends, readers everywhere. And they tell me about their lives too, which is important. It's a two-way street. And I think when a person puts herself out, as I have done for a long time now, it kind of gives permission for other people to as well. I'm looking at Karen saying that she has some other questions. Robin says, do you attend any of the conventions like BoucherCon?
BusherCon, I think it's
BoucherCon. I was looking at it like a French speaker. I don't even know what that is. What is that, Robin? Do you know what BoucherCon is?
I've heard of it, but I'm not. I know it's a writers' conference, but I don't know who
If it's a
goes.
writers' convention, no. I have to say, I don't do a lot of those, like writers getting together, talking about their agents and selling their books. I'd rather be writing my books. But tell me what BoucherCon is, by all means. Or
She'll jump in, I'm sure, and it's a mystery convention for
a
mystery.
mystery convention. Yeah, no, I've never written a mystery. I have written a couple of books that really dealt with crime. I'm very interested in crime, To Die For. It's not a mystery, you know right away who did what, but I'm interested in the mystery of the human behavior and the psychology of why people do things. And I also published a book that almost nobody read, including, you know, you have to be a real diehard fan to have found this one. It's called Internal Combustion. I like Internal Combustion, actually, but it was published by a very small press long ago, and it's a true crime book. So yeah.
Does your approach?
Audience Q, what writing advice would you give to your younger self? Oh gosh. You know, it's interesting. I could say, you know, for years I wrote for magazines. I wrote, you know, stuff that I wouldn't even have kept a copy of. It was, you know, travel pieces, service pieces. I was a ghostwriter for a famous baby doctor. I did a lot of stuff. And I could say, oh, Joyce, save your writing energy for the stuff you really burn to write. But I actually didn't have that luxury. I was supporting a family. So I can't even say that. I think my very young self didn't know this. I'll tell you. Yes. Okay. I'm speaking now to like my 18-year-old self. I grew up in an alcoholic family. I grew up in a family where we talked about all kinds of difficult subjects that many people do not in their families. One we never mentioned was the fact that every night my father got drunk, and every morning we pretended it didn't happen. And that was scary. That was as scary as having my father be drunk. I loved my father, but My father was somebody I felt a need to take care of. And because of that, I felt enormous shame. If we don't talk about it, there's something terrible about it, and it's sort of my fault, and I must keep the secret. So my young self writing, and I'm thinking now of me in the New York Times at age 18, the story that you mentioned, Ellen, and my first book, which was ostensibly a memoir called Looking Back, about my growing up in the 60s, which I published when I was 19 years old. In the 160 pages of that book, I never mentioned the fact that I came from an alcoholic family. I never mentioned the fact that while I was writing that book, I was suffering from pretty severe eating disorder. And I never mentioned the fact that I, this sort of youth spokesperson of America, had dropped out of her Ivy League university, given up her full scholarship at Yale, and moved in with a 53-year-old man who happened to be J.D. Salinger. That didn't make it into the book.
It made it into the next memoir.
25 years later. But the point is that who I was at 19 was somebody who was very invested in seeming like normal and okay and not too weird and wanting to be liked. And I was afraid that if you knew the truth about me, you'd say, ooh. In the case of not telling about Salinger, it had to do really with the fact that I wasn't allowed to tell that. But in the case of growing up in an alcoholic family, I now know so many of the people that I was keeping the secret from were also living in alcoholic families or had some other major family problem, and most of us do. And in fact, far from distancing me from my readers, it was my willingness to put myself out there and be vulnerable and be real, not put up this wall of, youth spokesperson of America, that connects me most powerfully. So the advice I would give to my 18-year-old self would be brave and tell the truth. But no 18-year-old can do that. You have to, and I don't fault her. I like that girl. She was doing the best she could. And I was writing very well. I was, as anybody would have, who was raised by my mother, who was quite something. My sister.
One of the things that I noticed, because, you talk about these aspects of your life that you didn't talk about until later, but you also give some of those qualities to some of your characters.
Mhm.
We know Jake's kids, are sort of whispering to Eleanor, yeah, Dad, when he's not drinking that much. And there's this whole secrecy about him. And
That's
you have Rain, has these relationships with much older men, and you had Cam, who had a relationship with a much younger woman. So all of that is sort of provides you've got that foundation of your life but then it gets created.
Well, Rain is with older men for a very different reason.
Yes,
She likes their
yes.
Social Security checks, but
yes,
but yeah, it's not my job to present life as we wish it was. It's life as it is, with all the kinds of flaws, and it's I mean, the title of the book is How the Light Gets In, which is the second half of a line from a Leonard Cohen song called Anthem, a song I love. The first half of that line is, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. My younger self didn't want to look at the cracks, wanted everything to be nice and smooth and perfect. And the woman I am now and the writer I am now can say it's the cracks that are the teachers. It is our losses and our sorrows and our mistakes that have taught us the most. Oh, Carol, I just had to thank you for saying I love this book so much, especially because, not too many people have read it yet because it just came out. So you must be a fast reader, Carol, and thank you. So yeah, me at 70 and me writing this book as I do now is me saying, it's the beauty lies in our failures sometimes. Eleanor had big dreams for her son, Toby, before he fell into the pond, and they're not going to happen. and she could spend the rest of her life grieving that. And she does spend a lot of time grieving that and regretting and thinking what was lost. But she eventually comes to embracing and recognizing what she has and what she has learned that she never would have known if not for that. I don't start regretting mistakes I've made because they all brought me right here.
That's right. One last question. You talk about being driven as a single mother who had to put a meal on her table and make sure the rent was paid, et cetera, et cetera. And you see yourself now as a master storyteller, or we see you as a master storyteller.
I won't call myself.
What drives you? What says to you every morning or when you are writing, get your butt in the chair. Let's do some writing today.
Well, it's a few things. I love to tell stories, and I love to connect with readers. I love to connect with readers. What I do is only half of the conversation. That's why when Carol came on a minute ago and said, I love this book, I wanted to just sit down with Carol and say, oh, tell me what you thought of this character. And, did you like Guy when he came onto the scene? I have a million questions for Carol. And that's what happens when I write. I get to connect with other women who may see my characters differently than I do. And that's part of the joy too. So, yeah.
All right. So tell me about one last thing. I said I was already there, but one last thing. If somebody wants to get your merch shirt,
okay,
what do they have to do?
The first thing they should do is go to my website, joycemaynard.com. And this isn't happening this week because I'm out on the road for a few weeks. But once I'm back home, actually, even in a couple of weeks, you can write to me. You go to my website and you see how to write to me. And you say, I've got a book club and I'd like to host my book club talking about how the light gets in. You get a t-shirt. I'd like you to have more than 4 people in your book club, but we'll send you a t-shirt, How the Light Gets In t-shirt. I sometimes zoom into your book club. I can't promise that, but I actually love to do it when I'm able to. So go to joycemaynard.com, send a letter, maybe not this week because I'm pretty busy, but it's a nice shirt. It's if I do say something I was very particular about, and I think there's a lot of good book club discussion in this book, as there is Count the Ways, incidentally.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall at your book clubs, and I'll try to be one.
Well, I'm sure you will get lots of responses. The book is How the Light Gets In by Joyce Maynard. It is a wonderful book. You can read it right now. Get it at bookshop.org or any indie bookstore.
Or listen to the audio.
Listen to the author read her own words, which is always a pleasure. I've read both this and Count the Ways and a few other books by Joyce. Cannot recommend them highly enough. So thank you very much, Joyce. It's been terrific.
Real pleasure.
And I will be back in my usual
mighty blaze for existing.
Oh, thank you.
To Jenna and Caroline. What an incredible contribution.
They have made a real difference in so many lives.
Karen, our producer, as well.
Yes. I will be back on July 25th with a debut spotlight doubleheader. I've got Amy Neff, who wrote The Days I Loved You Most, which is a wonderful story also about a family over many, many years. And then it's followed by a book whose title I think, Joyce, you will enjoy. It's a memoir by Jessica Waite, and it's called The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards, which is a very funny, tender book. And you'll understand the title more once you've read it. So that's Thursday, July 25th at 1 and then 2 o'clock. So thank you all. Till then, keep reading.